Well, good afternoon, folks. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending upon where you are coming from. Greetings. I'm the Reverend Jill Olds, the director of the Yale Youth Ministry Institute here at Yale Divinity School. And we are very pleased, the YMI is very pleased to welcome all of you to today's webinar entitled Adventures in Spacemaking with the Reverend Phiwa Langeni. I see some familiar faces and names among our group today, so welcome back to those of you who have joined us here before, and a special welcome to those who are joining us for the first time. We're so glad to have you. For our time today, Reverend Langeni will speak to us, and there will be a breakout session. We'll conclude with a final Q&A time, and aside from the breakout session, you'll remain muted throughout the time together, but we'll be monitoring the chat window, so if you have a question, please feel free to type it in there at any time. Our office has a great staff. I'd like to introduce them to you briefly and thank them for their work. The YMI falls under the purview of the Center of Continuing Education at YDS. So we have Kelly Morrissey, the Managing Director of the Center for Continuing Ed. And we're blessed to have Megan Lukens, our Communications Coordinator. And thanks to both of you for your presence and for your hard work. If you are new to us at the Yale Youth Ministry Institute, we invite you to peruse our website when you get a free chance. That's yaleyouthministryinstitute.org. We have a whole array of resources on there. We have curricula for your youth, training modules for your youth leaders, discussion forums. We have over 1,000 video clips and lectures given by the world's leading youth ministry experts. We have COVID-19 era resources. We have some tips for resilience with youth. We have resources for anti-racism work. We have links to other articles and materials. We have a lot on that website, and all of that is available for free. So please do feel free to check us out. We also would like you to mark your calendars for our upcoming events. Our next and final offering for this school year will be on Wednesday, May 5th at 12 p.m., which will be our summer symposium. And at that time, we will welcome the Reverend Tracy Smith. Reverend Smith is the author of Faithful Families, and she will speak to us about how spiritual practices can be implemented at home. And then she will lead us through a few of those practices together. A gift that Reverend Smith brings is that these practices are designed to be very accessible for churched and unchurched folks alike, and for children and youth of all ages. So please do consider joining us then on Wednesday, May 5th. A link to that registration can be found on our website, in our email newsletter, and in our chat window. And we're also delighted to invite you to also mark your calendars for June 7th through 11th for our summer study, at which time the Reverend Dr. Almeida Wright, professor at Yale Divinity School, will be teaching a course for us that is entitled Developing a Faithful Generation on Faith Development with Youth. This will be a Monday through Friday from 1:30 to 4 p.m. each day, and a link to that also will be posted in the chat here, and it is also on our website. And now it is my great pleasure to turn and introduce you all to the Reverend Langeni. The Reverend Langeni is the ambassador for innovation and engagement in the Center for Analytics, Research and Development and Data of the United Church of Christ. They were ordained in 2011, and since that time they have served in several settings: a thriving progressive church, a multi-charge rural church, large suburban church, and small churches deeply rooted in political and social justice. And most recently, they served a new church start nonprofit hybrid known as the Salus Center, currently in Lansing, Michigan, and Lansing's only LGBTQ+ resource and community center. As a queer, Black, trans person from an immigrant family, the Reverend Phiwa Langeni is uniquely gifted at identifying and addressing various societal gaps, especially with and for those with multiple minoritized identities. Reverend Langeni, welcome. We are beyond honored to have you, and I'll let you take it away.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a true honor and a nervously excited opportunity to be able to share with y'all. I'm thrilled that these institutes are happening, and that there are people who are actually like really engaged in like learning how to do and be better in the world, the different ministries that we participate in. But yeah, yes, it's really great to be here. I will pull up a screen share so we can follow along with the PowerPoint I prepared for this day. Trusting that folk can see the screen. Couple nods, perfect. Okay, so as Reverend Jill Olds has already said, I am the Reverend Phiwa Langeni. I use they, them, or he, him pronouns. I am the ambassador for innovation and engagement at the United Church of Christ, and I'm the founder of Salus Center. And so I figured I'll give y'all like a lay of the land, you know, how we're gonna proceed with our time here today. One, interactivity is so very encouraged. You know, it's great to be able to try to feel your energy from this digital distance that we have between us. And so to get us started off, in fact, if you have access to your chat window, why don't you just type in some of your locations? You know, where are you right now? Where are the places? You know, you can answer them whatever you want to, you know, whether it's your city, town, or a place inside your house. Where are you? I'm not sure if I can see my chat window from here. Yes, yes, yes. Okay, cool. So we've got some Connecticut, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, New York City, another Massachusetts, Connecticut. Excellent, excellent. More North Carolina, more Massachusetts, St. Louis, Missouri. I used to live there for like almost a decade. Iowa, Connecticut, Illinois. Excellent, excellent. Well, it's great to see all the different places y'all are coming in from, and you know, feeling grateful for the technologies that allow us to gather across such vast distances, and not just in space, but also in time, as I know others will be viewing this at a later date. So welcome, welcome indeed. So we're going to begin with some introductions of you all as we can in this format, and then a little bit more about me. We'll have a language exercise. So if you don't yet have writing utensils available, please grab some and you know, help kind of keep track of what we'll be doing together in our time. Um, we'll be in a few scenarios. I'll be asking for a few volunteers willing to indulge me in some made up scenarios that are based on real life happenings. And then we'll have a breakout room session for you know, some brief small group discussions where you know, we'll have 3 scenarios, and then we'll have the small groups kind of talk about the different scenarios, you know, looking for what they saw or heard or what they perceived in kind of what unfolded before you. And then when we come back, we'll do a little debrief, and then I'll just talk about some features of space making and give you some tips around, you know, what space make, like some tips and actions that you can take, you know, today or in the near future, for, you know, making space for LGBTQ plus youth that may be in the different settings that you're in, or really for anyone, but we'll try to focus on youth for today. Jill's gonna help me kind of monitor the chats, you know, so Jill, at any time, please feel free to, like, you know, flag me in a way that I can see, or just kind of hop in with your sound. It feels like I'm like flying a plane, you know, it's like a cockpit with all these fancy displays and whatnot. So I'm gonna ask Megan actually to put up our poll, I think I have to stop sharing for us to do some polls. So we'll use a poll to I guess get a sense of who you are. So the 3 questions, you know, what is your setting? You know, if you have you're in a worshiping community, faith-based organization, nonprofit, unaffiliated with religion, a for-profit organization, if you're an interested individual not associated with an organization, or something else, you can fill that in. The second question is, what is your role in your setting? If you're clergy, director, manager, etc. If you're in leadership as a staff member, if you're in leadership as a volunteer, if you're a participant or something else. And then the final question is, you know, how are you feeling about the current engagement with, I was supposed to say youth in your setting, my bad. Stellar, we could be a model for others. Pretty good, we're committed to getting better. Okay, we're getting people on board to improve. Frustrated, we're not even sure what we need or how to make it happen. What youth, or something else. So we'll just take a few moments to fill those in. I think we have almost everyone. Just wait a little bit. Excellent. So it looks like all of us who voted are in some faith-based organization. Um, most of us are in worshiping communities, and some of us are just in faith-based organizations that are not necessarily a worshiping community. The bulk of you here are clergy. Most of us are in leadership in some manner, and we've got a few folk who are participants or something else. I'm kind of curious, the person who wrote something else, would you be willing to type that into the chat? And it's okay if you don't, because consent is very important. So if you don't feel comfortable, please do not do so. And then for the third one, so we got a pretty good sense of, our engagement with youth in this space. That's pretty awesome to see. And some folk are feeling okay and you're on the way to getting better. And then we've got a few people who have said something else. Again, if you are feeling comfortable about maybe typing a few words or so about what that something else is, that'd be great. Chaplain, thank you. Thank you, Alicia. Okay, cool. This is a really awesome mix, and I feel as though what I've prepared will be relevant still. I wasn't really sure what we would find, so this is great. So one of the something else is this, Maria says that they're new in their current context and have not met many youth due to COVID. That's very real. That's very real. Thank you for sharing that. And Debbie says the same as Maria. Awesome. Okay, cool. Cool, cool, cool. Let's hop back into this presentation then. Oh wait, I'm not sharing this, am I? One would be surprised to know that I used to work in IT for several years. The way I bumble about now with technology, it's kind of wild. Uh, Happy bumbling. So y'all are familiar now with the chat function. So please feel free to hop in there if you have questions along the way, or if you need to flag me on something, please do feel free to do that. Okay, cool. So we're back in this presentation. So a little bit about me. So some of what I do, and I could easily fill a few hours worth of talking about who I am and where I've been. But I really want to just kind of focus on just a few things, that don't show up necessarily in my bio. So I am South African. I was born in South Africa, and I lived in both South Africa and in the US in several different states, southern and Midwestern states, during my formative years. And that definitely has played a part into, who I am and how I've chosen to show up in the world. My perspective has been as an other in many of the spaces that I've occupied. And so it's kind of from the space of otherness that has kind of impassioned and fueled my work and my energy to do this kind of space making for others, and space making, moving just beyond like physical space, but including physical spaces that you may be gathering with folk. I kind of consider space making as, making sure that there's room for someone to exist in their fullest selves. I've often found, and especially unfortunately often in faith and Christian spaces in particular, that's where I've spent time. There's a requirement for folk with different identities, whether it's LGBTQ or race or gender, or nationality or belief system, whatever that may be, that requires folk to leave their identities at the door before they can come into spaces that are religious or worshipful or really anywhere, as we're seeing in the last few years politically. So we close out spaces for folk to be able to be who they are in their fullest selves. And so for me, a lot of my othered identities, which I now use as a capital O and not a small o, other, I like to make sure that we're being intentional about making sure we're making space for folk, right? Physically and just, as humans, as people. And that's really shaped really everything that I do. I've been finding in recent years, so I tend to notice when things are not necessarily fully welcoming, so we have this idea that again, as a Black queer trans pastor in a primarily white denomination, I'm constantly kind of like seeing the ways in which, even a very progressive and open and welcoming, inclusive denomination, we don't always quite make that mark, because societally we're not in a place where space making is valued or it's a priority. We often use a word like assimilation, which, for the longest time, again, as an immigrant, with my family coming here as a child, that was like the goal as an immigrant, was to assimilate. And retrospectively, I see and experience, even the word makes me feel some kind of way. Like there's a violence to this assimilating, because it requires someone to erase parts of who they are to fit into whomever may be, like, whatever may be the norm of where they are. So with those kinds of experiences, growing up, and later on in life, as I've come out, as a queer person, as a trans person, and then also as a clergy person, you may not be too surprised to discover that, there aren't many places where I can be, Black, queer, trans, and religious openly at the same time. I've often found that, when I want to be in religious spaces and I have to hide my queerness, I tend to be in white faith communities. But if I want to be in like Black faith communities, and not have to, tone down my Blackness, which is what tends to happen in white spaces primarily, I have to check my queerness at the door. And then I find, when I'm in primarily queer spaces, and I can be Black in those spaces as well, for obvious reasons, I think, to all of us here. I don't feel comfortable, coming out as a clergy person because of the violence that the church continues to do toward LGBTQ folk, And so it's really that kind of like not being able to be, some of these three primary identities that I have at the same time, at the same place, that led me to create Salus Center. Um, so I moved back to the place where my parents live in Lansing. So I moved back to Lansing, Michigan, um, for what I thought would be a temporary moment, as I was regrouping, trying to reorganize, figure out what I wanted to do next. And I ended up staying for almost 4 years, or 4.5 years. And I founded Salus Center, which is Lansing's only LGBTQ resource and community center. It also was a Salus Center United Church of Christ, a small worshiping community within that. And I found some of the most holy things happen in that space that was intentionally built in a location that never was a church or a faith space. Um, and I also found that one of the biggest barriers that I had for my work was having Reverend in front of my name. The biggest barriers of my work in LGBTQ spaces was having Reverend in front of my name. If that doesn't disturb your spirit, I hope it does by the time we're done with this, because the different kinds of faith traditions that are represented here and beyond, that is very counter what is at the core of our faith community, the faith messages that we represent. And so space making is woven into every part of who I am and what I do, and is even really truly like comes from what I believe theologically, that God wants us to be whole people, and that people who weren't just created and left behind at creation, right? But this idea that we're constantly becoming, we're constantly growing, and we're constantly being revealed, like God is revealing God's self to us, as we grow and learn, Um, and so, that makes room for folk who are trans, people who are queer, maybe or don't know that until later in life, people who are straight, cis, hetero. It makes room for all of us just to be who we are in our fullest, but not to feel like we have to stay where we once were, because that's where people know us. I liken it to this idea that, maybe when you were 5, if you were a participant in your faith community, your understandings of God and the way that it was, the message was shared with you at the age of 5 has to be different when you're 15, has to be different when you're 25, 35, 45, right? So this idea that we're all constantly evolving, and we're all constantly learning bigger and better and more honest and authentic ways of knowing who God is. And none of us can ever really fully capture who God is. And anyone who claims that they do is all automatically at the top of my suspicious list, you know. So yeah, so that's kind of sums up, you know, in a hopefully a brief-ish moment about, you know, who I am, where I've been, and the things that I have learned and the things I'm continuing to learn. Yes. So let's see what this next slide has. So just I'm gonna go over a couple of terms that, you know, you will hear in our time together in case you don't know them. I just wanna, you know, have like maybe some shared understandings about what I mean, at least when I'm saying them. So cisgender is a word that describes a person whose gender identity aligns with their assigned sex at birth. Um, this is basically so people who are not transgender. And I think this is really important to start, you know, getting used to, you know, so you might hear me say cis, which is short for cisgender. Um, but it's really important, right, to be able to name cisgender so that, you know, I believe that as long as we only ever name those who are othered, they will always remain othered. So if we say, we only say, oh, someone is transgender, but we never talk about someone who is cisgender, the unspoken assumption is that cisgender is normal and transgender is not normal. And that is actually a very violent assumption that, you know, again, like around our language is going to be very important for us to, you know, to shift how we speak about people and their identities so that we don't perpetuate or create the very harm that we're hoping to help eradicate, you know, so cisgender, transgender, and then of course there are many folk, you know, who don't maybe necessarily fall underneath either of those umbrellas, you know, so like non-binary folk, genderqueer folk, and that's like in a longer, you know, terms of list that I have elsewhere. But for these purposes, you know, cisgender, transgender, and under that umbrella, you have maybe folk who are like non-binary, etc. And then there's the word queer. And so this is it tends to be, you know, it's an umbrella term essentially, you know, to refer to like all LGBTQ plus folk. Um, it's a kind of a simple label to try to explain a complex set of identities, sexual behaviors and desires, and or advocates for breaking binary thinking and seeing both sexual orientation and gender identity as potentially fluid. Um, so all that to say, basically, you know, I tend to use it as a catch-all term. And though in my time in Salus Center, as I was working with older LGBTQ folk, I found that as comfortable as I am with the word and as empowering as I find it to be, and especially as someone who is gender queer, I find that that kind of captures more fully, you know, the fluidity of my sexuality and gender. Um, it actually was a word that was creating harm for folk who grew up with it as a disgusting a slur. And so I offer this word of caution, you know, that not everybody is going to feel this word as empowering. And really just kind of the rule of thumb is, you know, use the language that people use to describe themselves. So if someone calls themselves gay, I will talk about them as gay, you know. Um, and you know, it's really good to ask as well, you know, don't make assumptions. And then there's this word privilege. You know, this is, I'm sure most, if not all of us have heard this word around privilege, at least is how we use it in these, in recent times, you know. And so I kind of define it as, you know, groups of people with one or more identities that socially, politically, religiously, etc., afford them the freedom of normativity. Even though everyone in the group may experience tremendous hardships and other situations that would seem disadvantaged, many of the benefits, even as simple as the freedom from systemic societal barriers, are solely based on the randomness of the circumstances of their birth. And I purposely decided to like define it in this way because, you know, the word privilege, the way we've always known it before, you know, recent years, is like this idea that privilege is something you get bonus, right? Like this is something extra you get. And so when you're in, for example, like white folk who are impoverished, or, you know, other folk who maybe have like a few privileged identities, but are otherwise, you know, disadvantaged in other ways, will kind of argue with this idea that, well, I'm not privileged, you know, I struggle too. Well, really, this idea of privilege means that your starting point is ahead of others whose starting points, you know, um, can't even reach where you are, like is a base level. And so it's not about having something extra necessarily as much as it is you get to start at zero while everyone else starts at negative, you know, and then that compounds, right? If you have more than one not privileged identity. which is then the next slide I want to talk about, is minoritized. And so this I describe as more commonly known in culture as minorities. There are groups of people with one or more identities that are routinely and systemically disadvantaged, often in violent and death-dealing ways, and they're portrayed and considered negatively or inferior. I use this term in the stylings of a verb to keep the focus on the actions of the oppressor through systems, laws, beliefs, narratives, etc., that disempower large groups of people. Oftentimes, minoritized people are not in the minority. And one real quick, easy example of that is, in South Africa, for example, when white folk came and colonized South Africa, um, they were not in the, in population wise, they were not in the majority, right? They were the minority, but they created these systems and laws and practices that divided Black folk, right? And then created, so they were minoritizing people so that now, they were in the minority because of all the subgroups they created. Even though population wise, they were the minority. I hope that makes sense. If you have any questions, I guess, please feel free to drop those in the chat. Ooh, sorry. So I cannot have conversations about LGBTQ space making without approaching the pronouns. A lot of people are like, pronouns, what do you do that for? Why does that matter? Can't you just, right? So um I've also heard from folk, there are people who, again, who don't maybe necessarily identify as male or female, who maybe see their gender as something more fluid, who choose to use, like, the singular they as their pronouns. And there are other pronouns that I didn't use here. A quick Google search will show you the many different options there are. And so one of the main objections I get to people using the singular they is from folk who say, but it's not correct grammatically. And I am so very pleased to say, as a word nerd, that um, this actually is a return to how Shakespeare and them used to use this term, the singular they. This was common, and in fact, the use of you, we could say you singular or you plural. You was not always a singular and a plural term. There was you and thee, right, or thou, and the they used singularly as well as plurally. And so language evolves as we do, and it'll ebb and flow. We might discard some stuff now, and then all of a sudden it makes a comeback. We create new language. And so I encourage you, I guess, again, like doing a quick search on Google will help you like look more deeply as to why actually using the singular they is not incorrect. And PS, we already use it in language, so part of what I try to do is like, one, kind of help people ease or move through their own obstacles as to why, they may be resistant to use singular they language. But I've tried to encourage folk, to use it with more intention, So I'll use these examples of someone named Kim, so Kim left her bag on the table. If it's hers, find out if she wants it brought to her or if she'll get it herself. We also have Kim left his bag on the table. If it's his, find out if he wants it brought to him or if he'll get it himself. And then we have Kim left their bag on the table. If it's theirs, find out if they want it brought to them or if they'll get it themselves. And you'll see that first part of the sentence, right? We already use the singular they. When someone is like, oh, look, someone left their pencil on the table, right? And so it's like, it's not as strange or unusual as it may feel at first. It does certainly, require exercising, like it's a new muscle that you need to use. So if I go to the gym on day one and lift my little weights, I'm not gonna expect to walk out, looking like a bodybuilder, right? Well, I do, but I don't share that out loud usually. But it's gonna take practice, right, before I become more adept and it becomes more natural, right, to be able to like use that language. So I encourage you to practice this with people who are not uh you know who don't use the singular they, have someone who can kind of hold you accountable. practice it with one another. Practice talking about that person who uses the singular they when they're not there. Ask people to check you on it if you use the wrong pronouns, and just keep trying and working at it. It makes a bigger difference than you may realize. And we'll kind of we'll see some of why as we continue this presentation. Okay, so before we hop into this language exercise, is there anything I see there's like a number next to the chat bubble. Is there anything I need to see before we continue?
Nope, keep going, Phiwa. You're
Okay.
doing great.
All right, so language exercise. As a word nerd, I can't do this without in having y'all engage me in some word nerdetry. So we'll take 3 minutes, so basically, like, don't overthink it. I'm gonna encourage just to write down a list of words that you use to describe yourself. It's purposefully vague-ish, so there's no right or wrong way to do this because these are your words that you use to describe yourself. So I will set my little timer here, and let's just do 3 minutes. Just jot down a list of words, and then we'll move on to the next thing. Take about 30 more seconds. Okay. How was that for y'all? Having like radio silence on this digital format was so strange, but also really beautiful. So, Megan, if you would please get us set up with the poll. I think I have to stop sharing, right? Okay, so I'm inviting you to do this poll, and you can pick more than one option. So if you look at your list of words, how many, or if you have any of your words, if they are relational words, so if they're like you in relation to someone else, fill that out. If they're role and or career based, if it's about your race and or ethnicity, it's about your gender and or sexuality, or group-based, nationality, religion, affiliations, etc., or if they're gendered. Just take a few moments and we'll fill out those things. Looks like we're getting close to done. Yeah, so I'm looking at the chat. Denise says about the singular they, even if it were ungrammatical, they is correct for those who want to use it. And this is from an English teacher. Yes, that's actually a really great point. Some of my other work that I do, this idea that even if it were true that it was ungrammatical, what you're saying to someone essentially is that these systems and rules of grammar matter more to you than this person's humanity, their personhood, you know. And so I would like to think that most of us, who maybe are encountered with, being asked to use they, them pronouns for someone, that's not actually what they want to say to someone, but that is what's being communicated, is that, either your discomfort or, your adherence to rules matters more than this person's life. And that's a very, very bold thing that, hopefully you aren't trying to say, not you, right? You kind of universal are trying to say, and, encouraging folks to really kind of commit to practicing using these pronouns. And also an English teacher said so. So you gotta, take that into account. Okay, so I think we'll continue to move forward here. So it looks like 100% of our word lists are relational. And this is actually a really good spread. I'm impressed. Who are y'all? This is great. Um, in social psychology, there is this thing that happens where it's like, when people are in a group, um, if they're like the only one that has like a particular identity, when they're in this group, when they're asked to name their identities, they'll be most likely to name that identity than they would others. So for like the social sciences, for example, tend to have like a lot of women in them. And so when there are men folk in social sciences, they will almost always name their manness. But when they're not in those spaces, they almost never name their madness, right? So I like this exercise, and in a different setting, we might even go through and actually look at the specific words, where I'm actually been pleased to find, in the last few years that I've been doing this, back when I started doing this many years ago, in rooms that are primarily white, almost no one ever named their whiteness. They never used white as one of the words that they use to describe themselves. But lately, I've been finding most people now in the room will name their race, which again is important for me because it says, you're recognizing that, there's this assumed normativity if you don't name that identity. And so, with so many people of color around the world, who are, all of us really are affected by, white colonialism, often in deadly ways for folk who are not white. It's so important, right, to name even what is normative in a culture so that those who are other do not continue to remain othered, right? And so that kind of, even as someone who is from South Africa, for example, very rarely do people actually name that they're American. Like if I'm doing this in a room full of, folk from the US, and so again, especially like with this rising level of kind of like nationalism that again has deadly consequences for many, it's so important, right, to be able to name that which we take as like normatized, right? Because being American has effects on people who are not American, whether they're people who are immigrating to this country or people who are still in other countries. When we export our hate to other places, particularly Christianity gets exported to other countries that then become very deadly for folk who are LGBTQ, in ways that we have deemed we don't do that here. So it goes out to other people's lands. And, so we have very deadly consequences, right, of being in this country, and not being able to name the fact that, right, we are American. Another one too that comes up for me often in these things that is I put into the category of microaggression, even though microaggressions, there's nothing micro about them. People are like, oh, you're from South Africa, you don't have an accent. And that really, really, really grinds my gears because, first of all, I do have an accent. It's a Midwestern accent, right? We have this idea that, Midwestern is the norm. So we never talk about a Midwestern accent. We talk about a Southern one or a Bostonian one or one from Bronx or wherever else, right? But we never talk about there being a Midwestern accent. And so really we need to name that, because, we don't want to assume that we are normal and then everyone else is not, right? So we name all of these things to like kind of maybe start closing that gap between those of us who get the privilege of being normatized and those who do not. Especially with my parents, have a Black South African accent. And even when we're in South Africa, because we went to white schools, we sounded British, and so even the ways in which how our accents do come across, right, has very specific connotations, how, even people in the South here, how people are surprised if someone is educated and have a Southern accent. What? Right? And so this is what being able to name our normatized identities and those that are not really starts to disrupt these systemic practices, right, of violence making and dehumanizing one another. Okay, so let me get back to our presentation here. So looking at the your list of words, ask some questions, that just to think about, not to answer specifically. Did you always use these words to define yourself? What has changed and why? And if nothing has changed, why not? And if someone else were to encounter these list of words that you've put together, what might they be able to learn about you? And then what if other people regularly and routinely use words that are incompatible with the ones you listed? What if other people ask you every time they see you if you're still any of the words you've listed? What if other people who do either of these things are your parents, teachers, therapists, pastors, bosses, and or others with relative power over you? And so I hope, you see the explicit link that I'm making too, right? Between, again, I don't know all of your identities around LGBTQ-ness, but this idea that, how you know yourself and then how the world chooses to see you is a thing that LGBTQ folk are always having to navigate, some of us maybe, who are able to pass as whatever it is, that we know ourselves to be, have different experiences than those of us who maybe may never pass, based on like society's definition of what, our identities need to look like or be, even like, with like gay and lesbian couples, when like those movements were happening in church, whether or not, they would be allowed to marry each other. There was I was noticing a pattern, right, where like, in church and other public spaces where people were okay with like same sex, same gender relationships as long as they mimicked heterosexuality, right? So there had to be like a boy one and a girl one, and those were the relationships that were more willing and able to accept than maybe someone who was like more gender fluid, or maybe two folk who are like masculine appearing or feminine, so it's like this idea of like disrupting normativity so that people can just be who they are in their fullest. And so I'm gonna like really kind of touch power dynamics and keep moving because we can do this for like a whole week, right? And this idea that, as an adult, especially when you're working with youth and children, you already have the power in whatever setting you're in this culture, right? One of the privileges we have, right, is like age, kind of like in the middle years. I think I read an article not too long ago about kind of like the privileged ages in this country are like between like 25 and 55 or something like that. So if you're younger or older than that, right, you are kind of like in this minoritized age bracket. So as an adult working with youth and children, you already hold power. And then these power dynamics shift rapidly if you are authorized in some manner by the organization. So if you're like clergy or staff or a volunteer, or some kind of like authorization by the organization you're in that's working with youth, that increases your power dynamic. Or if you're a cisgender adult, and again, if you're authorized cisgender adult caring for transgender youth, or if you're straight and the youth person you're dealing with is queer, or if you're white and the youth person is Black, Indigenous, or a person of color, or if you're fluent in English and the youth person is not, right? And then this compounds, right? If you are all of these things at the same time for a youth who is all of those things at the same time, right? So like the level of difference and otherness, right, continues to grow. And so being very mindful of the power dynamics that you bring into a space, especially as you're dealing with youth folk, and really anyone, I would say, but with youth folk as well, just be mindful that with the power that you have, right, you don't want to fall into this category of being someone who continuously uses language that isn't yours to use, that doesn't see you in the way that you know yourself, to be, that refuses to even learn or grow, right? To like get to know who they are, but you're just telling them who you need them to be, right? To fit into whatever that may be, whether it's like your religion or, the classroom or, group norms that are based on, societal norms of identities and whatnot, right? Because this now, whatever you were feeling with this part of the exercise, what if other people did these things to you? It only gets even more impactful when it's coming from someone who has power over you. And then with youth in particular, right, in their formative years, those are things that you don't easily forget. I'm sure many of us, will remember very vividly things that happened to us, maybe from like adults or whomever else, right? That all the good stuff that maybe have happened, we may not remember it as strongly as the things that we felt slighted or unseen or invisibilized or whatever else, right? Those things have effects even into what adults we become if we become adults, right? Because that's also the reality among our youth, is that they're at higher rates for harming themselves for these kinds of things and others. So in a society that's not really LGBTQ friendly fully, it matters so deeply, how we as adults in the spaces with youth folk, how we choose to conduct ourselves so that we can at least be an oasis before they have to go back out into the world to encounter a world that's not yet ready. And I want to emphasize yet, because we are working. So I am going to stop this share so we can see each other. I am going to invite someone who is willing to engage in a brief scenario, 3 brief scenarios. The first person I would like to invite is someone who is willing to, a straight person. For the second scenario, I'm going to ask for 2 cisgender people. And then for the third scenario, I'm going to ask for a white clergy person, or yeah, we'll say a clergy person. And so the invitation is going to be based, I'm going to kind of create a scenario and we will kind of chat. And so the rest of us who are not in the scenario, I'm going to encourage to like jot down, like, what are you perceiving? What do you see happening in these scenarios? And so when we're done with the 3 scenarios, we're going to go into our breakout rooms, small groups, for maybe about 15 minutes, and talk about what you saw, what you heard, what you perceived, and then of course, tie it into what that might mean for when we come back to debrief together. We'll tie it into what that might mean for space making. Does that kind of make sense? So a volunteer, if you say yes, you will be pinned to the screen with me so that you'll be recorded on video, and we'll do this little scenario. And then again, like I said, we'll do like the 3 back to back, and then we'll go into breakout rooms. So Rabbi Michael is going to volunteer. For which one would you like to volunteer, Rabbi?
Whichever one you think I would be best fit for.
Okay, cool. So let's have you as clergy. How's that? So do we have a straight person willing to hop in with me? You could just unmute yourself. Okay, Denise, it looks like you're willing. Oh wait, you said cis woman. So
I
do you want,
don't
let's
know.
have you. I'm sorry.
Whatever you say, I am. Does that mean I'm a woman that was born a woman? Yes.
So let's have Denise. Let's have you do scenario 2.
Okay.
Okay. So does someone who does not know Denise, who is cisgender, like to join for scenario 2? Oh, we're a shy bunch. Allison, thank you. All right, so straight person, who are you?
I guess I'm Debbie. I guess I'm straight. I'm not cis, but I'm married to a man.
I got you.
I'm
Cool.
gender fluid, but I'm married to a man, so I guess I'm straight.
I got you. I got
Right?
you. If that's how, like, these are your words, so
Okay.
let's, cool. All right, Megan, if
Yeah,
you
I'm
would mind,
straight.
please.
I guess I would identify as that. Yes.
Let's pin Debbie on here. Thank you. All right, Debbie. So I'm gonna pan out the scenario, right? So you are a person who, actually, I didn't ask. Are you do you have a specific religious affiliation?
I'm in the United Church of Christ.
Okay, perfect. So you're new to the area, and you are looking for a new church. You go to the Find Your Church tool on the UCC website, and you see these really great stuff on this website, right? There's this church, Zoom UCC, and it is, very welcoming. It looks like it's definitely gonna be a place where you and your husband can come through as a gender fluid person, but still straight. You're like, yeah, I can definitely find my home here. Everything is great, right? You go to this church, and everything you thought it would be and more, right? Like the worship is great. People greet you warmly and authentically. Like you are ready to sign the membership card because, wow, this feels like home. And then coffee hour comes around and you have the most delicious treats that you enjoy. And everybody's just really great, And so right before you head back home, you're like, you know what? You've had maybe a few too many cups of coffee and lemonade and whatever beverage you drink, and you decide to go stop at the bathrooms. You get to the restroom area, and there are 2 doors. One door says gays, Gays, and one door says lesbians. What do you do?
I would ask someone, I guess.
You've really got to go. You're doing the pee-pee dance right now. Like
I
you've
would
got to
go
go.
and whatever one was closest to me.
They're right in front of you. What do you do? You're not a gay or a lesbian.
Well, the person that I am, I would just go use the bathroom without,
Yeah. So which one do you go into? What door do you open?
I would probably go in the lesbian one.
Okay. Why is that?
Well, because I look like a woman.
Mm.
And lesbians are usually women.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it wouldn't freak anyone else out.
Okay. But that moment of that pee-pee dance and like, I gotta make a decision. Like what was your first thought when you saw those 2 doors? Like, what are you feeling? What are you thinking?
It would surprise me.
Okay.
It would surprise me not because they had those restrooms, but because even that is exclusive. Like they're trying to be inclusive.
Yeah.
But they're excluding, other groups of folks.
Awesome.
Cool.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Scenario 2. And for y'all who are watching this, please continue to jot down notes. I appreciate you, Debbie. Denise and Allison, won't you hop in and join me, please? Are y'all unmuted too? And then Megan, I don't know if you can pin Denise and Allison, or if it's only one at a time.
You might be able to spotlight us.
Allison, hello.
Hi.
You can see Denise here. Okay, so Denise and Allison, we are at an event put on by a local organization that Allison is a part of. And I know both of you, right? So I have known Denise. We went to elementary school together. And Denise and I, you know, I'm surprised to see Denise at this event because I volunteer at this organization at Zoom org that Allison is, you know, the director of Zoom org, right? So we're at this event and let's get started, right? So, hey, Allison, it's great to see you. You know, wow, y'all really did the thing here. It's very fantastic. And oh my gosh, Denise, what are you doing here?
I'm a member of this organization.
What? Such a small world. Hey, Allison, do you know Denise? Do y'all know each other?
I don't know Denise. Denise, very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Allison.
Yeah, you know, Denise and I, we went to elementary school together. We met each other in 3rd grade, and like it was so wild, you know, because we used to always get in trouble together, you know, and like whenever him and his brother would, you know, we rode the bus to school together, you know, so him and his brother and I would start all sorts of shenanigans, you know, we'd always sit in the back of the bus and like start trouble, but whenever the bus driver had to like pull over and like get us to stop, you know, Denise though, he was a riot. He would always like be real quick-witted and have something funny to say, and then the whole bus would erupt in laughter. But this one time, his brother crossed the line, and we were suspended from the bus. So our parents made us walk to school, and it was a long walk, a very long walk. But it's so cool to see y'all here.
Thanks for sharing that story. It's really nice to have friends who are that you've known that long. And I am surprised, Phiwa, to hear that you ever got suspended from anything.
Well, I don't usually talk about that publicly, but you know, so that's off the record. Please don't put that on the website.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, cool. Denise, how long have you been a member here?
I'm just a little speechless because you may not have noticed, but I'm a woman.
Oh, right. You know, I keep forgetting. Yes. Sorry, my bad. Denise transitioned. How many years ago was that again, Denise?
Well, I mean, I've always been a woman. I just made the social change a few years ago.
Ah, right. Oh, I always just forget, you know, because you've always, you know, I've always just known you as Denise, and you know, just the guys hanging out. You know, I love you though.
I know.
Awesome.
Denise, it's nice to meet you. I go by the pronouns she, her. And I didn't want to interrupt Phiwa because you are who you are. So thank you for clarifying your identity.
Yeah, I'm
Excellent.
seeing her too. You and I, Allison. But back in the day, we had fun on that bus.
Indeed, indeed. All right. Thank you both. Scenario 2, Allison and Denise.
You're welcome.
Scenario 3, Rabbi Michael.
Locked and loaded. Ready?
Excellent. Hey, so you and I are, or you are at your worshiping community, and I don't know if you all have like a greeting line at the end of service where people kind of like, you know, shake hands and be like, hey, what's up? Here's what's going on in my life. And you identify as white, yes?
I mean, I have a unique blended genetic background, but
Sure.
I guess for what it looks like up front, yeah, let's go with white.
Okay, cool. So let's go with white. So now you're at your faith community, right? So you've got like a an event where a lot of guests kind of come through, right? And so as folk are kind of greeting you and going by, there's like a whole bunch of folk who are not white who have visited on this day for this event that you're having. And so as you're kind of going through the line, you have folk kind of going through the line. So I'll be like multiple people through the line, right? Asking you these questions like, hey, Rabbi Michael, thank you so much for your message. Like, oh, it was perfectly on time and whatnot. It's really great to be here. I didn't even know y'all were here and stuff, So, I have a white nephew in my family. My brother, adopted, his wife's son, and she's white too. And so my nephew, oh, he's the cutest thing, but I absolutely love my white nephew. Yeah, but anyway, thanks for the service. This has been great. Here comes the next person. Wow, Rabbi Michael, I didn't know what it was going to be when I got here. I'm just really surprised at how articulate you are. I didn't know white people talk like that, but thank you. It was really great to like just see how very articulate you are. Here comes this other person, right? Hey, this is great. Michael, I haven't heard that name before. So like, where are you from?
Actually, funny, New York, but been around. Now
You'd
I'm
be like,
finally back in New York, yeah.
okay. But like, where are you from?
Depends how far back you want to go. If you're willing to sit here for 5 minutes and hold up the line, I'll tell you all the way back, a wonderful, almost exotic, blend of genetic personalities here that you're kind of relating to. And I'm so glad that makes you feel comfortable.
Yeah, that's so wild. Like you mostly look white though, you can't even tell you have the other stuff in you, but that's really cool. Yeah. And one of my best friends is white. Like my college friends, like, yeah, she's white. It's so cool.
Wow.
Yeah.
And how does that make you feel? Like, are you happy with that? What are your
Oh yeah,
feelings?
we don't really talk anymore, but back in college though, we were like down like 4 flat tires. I mean, we were really cool. She's definitely one of my best friends in college.
Right.
Yeah. All right. End scene. Thank you. All right, so let's how many folk do we have in this room right now? I'm wondering if we can kind of do this as a group or if we had to do small groups.
About 25.
Okay. Let's do it together. Let's kind of do it together. Yeah. Trying to look at the time here too. So, what did you see? What did you hear? What did you perceive? Maybe just unmute yourself if you want to speak and let us know. And also use a chat if you would like to.
I loved how Debbie was so considerate and sensitive to what was going on at the bathroom scene, holding it in, and even admits that instinctual urge to be so considerate to not want to freak anyone out. I thought that was really beautiful. I like that. And I also found that it was interesting that she, instinctively kind of just resorted to this. Well, my physical appearance is like this, meaning she kind of relied on the external aspects of herself.
Yeah. Thank you. I think I hear someone, but I don't really hear them.
Can you hear me now? Is that any better?
You're very quiet, Jane. Almost like you might have earphones plugged in that you're not using, or you're using a different kind of microphone.
I don't know, something wrong with my microphone. I'm not sure I'm going to get it fixed right. So
I can hear you, and I'll repeat for
Okay.
others who can't. So go ahead.
we had somebody come to our church who is an intern who used they pronouns, and we are just at the very beginning stages of discussing this at our church, and they ended up leaving because they didn't want to be a teacher to us, to the rest of the congregation. So my question is, how much can we expect for what we need to learn on our own versus to be taught by others? I guess is the question.
Awesome.
Would you like me to repeat that, or Phiwa, did you get that? I'll repeat it really quickly.
Sure.
Yeah. So someone started attending the church. It was either intern or interim. I couldn't quite hear, but that person uses they, them pronouns, and they left because they did not want to be in the position of having to educate the congregation about this. And that was a new experience for the congregation. And just sort of wondering whether education is, how much of education ought to be in the camp of those who are privileged, and how much can an individual who might be using they, them pronouns be able to educate? And that actually plays into some things that you and I were talking about before, but yeah.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I guess we can kind of do the Q&A, and maybe what I can do is I'll share the PowerPoint for folks to kind of see some of the other things later on in the session, because I want to make sure we're dealing with things that people here would like to see. So analogy, you are hosting a dinner party, you invite some folk over, and they get there at the time that you said they should get there. And when they arrived, you still have on your shower cap, your slippers, you haven't gone shopping yet to get the food that you're going to be serving for this dinner party. And so here are these people like, okay, but I came hungry. I thought we were going to have this dinner party. I didn't know we are going to wait the few hours for you to get ready, right? And so it's a silly example, right? For what I would even kind of put as the work, you wouldn't require your guests right then to one of them go shop for the food while you finish getting ready, and then coming back and then cooking the dinner to this party that you invited them to, right? Like that wouldn't happen. And so in a similar way, when there are organizations or congregations that want to be inclusive of LGBTQ folk or people of different ethnic or racial identities, or et cetera, right? You've got to get your house ready. You've got to get the food. You've got to cook it, right? Maybe ask them, do you have any dietary concerns? You're not going to cook ham sandwiches if the person doesn't eat ham or gluten, right? So this is the work of the church, right? Is how do we feed the people that we're trying to have here? And if we're only ever going to eat pork, there's going to be a lot of people who will not come because that is not actually a welcoming meal to them, And so, again, not as a judgment or shame, because I think that's a tool of the oppressor, but as an invitation to, and I think, again, to kind of answer the question that we were going to maybe get into, Jill, this idea that it really oughtn't be on the person who you're trying to invite to have to cook that meal for you, because they're coming to you because they're trying to get fed. They're trying to have community, right? So what do you need to do and learn to be that community that you desire that is truly welcoming, right? So one easy question I'd ask you is, where do you get your information? Who are the people you follow on social media? Like, what are their identities? Is this, CNN telling the story about Black people? How are Black people talking about their story? How are LGBTQ folk talking about their stories, right? Truly, like, my Google search is the same as yours. Like, so just type it into Google. And I think, being able to discern, like, not a skill I'm learning now, maybe that everybody has, but like trying to discern, what could be like, reliable sourcing, but I would definitely say, I'm saying, like, hearing from the people who are, this phrase that I've been using, I kind of typed into the PowerPoint too, like, nothing about us without us. So if it's a room full of white men writing laws about women's bodies, be very suspicious, right? I'm not going to get my information about white women's bodies from a room full of white men. So I would say diversify your sources, truly, I mean, there's like a lot of free, like, see who the people are, different people of different identities are following on Twitter, and you'll almost always get like some free content. And then even then, I would encourage you to find their Cash App and like drop some change in their pockets, because it's a lot of work to always have to explain your existence and identities when you just want to be, And like earlier with Debbie, I just want to pee. I don't want to have to do the math of how people read me today if I'm going to have violence done against my body because my queerness is a threat to yours. But how, right? Literally, 0% of transgender people have enacted violence on people in bathrooms. Almost 100% of those enacting violence have been cisgender men. How many of those laws, bathroom laws, are based on the perpetrators of the violence and not the actual people who tend to be the victims of such violence, right? We have to change our narratives. We're making these transgender bathroom laws when it's not transgender people doing the harm. They say men in dresses. Well, guess what? It's men who are doing the violence, not trans women, right? Disrupt those narratives. They're deadly, they're violent, right? Hannah, I see your hand.
This is a slightly different direction, but
Sure.
I have a sort of specific question about making space, because working with youth, I think we all know that that also means a lot of working with parents. And I have, so we have a college student in our church. I have not actually met this person yet, but I know his family because his family is very involved, including his sister and his mother. He is trans. His mother and father refuse to acknowledge that. Their line is, they believe trans people exist, they just don't believe their child is trans. So the parents continually dead name and use the wrong pronouns. And as the pastor, because predominantly my pastoral relationship is with this young man's parents and sister, I don't know how to both engage in that personal pastoral relationship with the parents and also try to make any sense of space in this worshiping community for this guy to ever want to come back, because big surprise, he doesn't, right? Like, he thinks church is where everyone agrees with his mom and dad. Or just because these are very active people in our church, and I want it to be clear that this is a space that trans youth are welcome in. And so I don't want the conversation that might be overheard, you know, like that it's,
Sure.
I hope this is clear. Anyway, I don't know
Yeah.
if there's any wisdom, but like, this is just a pastoral thing that I have been struggling with for 3 years.
Yeah.
And I can't work my way through it.
Yeah, thank you. So it's not at you necessarily, right? It's kind of a blanket question. What are the messages coming from the pulpit that communicate that welcome? What are the spaces? What are the books in the libraries? How does the curriculum look? Is it always boys and girls? Is it children as well? Brothers, sisters, and siblings? How's your liturgy? How does your choir sing? Is it women's voices and men's voices, or is it upper and lower range voices, right? So I would say, if they're not ready to engage a conversation, it's going to be a matter of how do you build a culture that supports this person, whether or not his parents do, you know, because you can't tell them how to parent, and that's not, you know, your job, right? But I think as leaders in these organizations, what we can do is we get to shift culture, or do the work of shifting culture, right? Because it's the people who make the culture. So in the bathroom situation, right? One of my pet peeves is when you end up with, you know, I was being facetious when I did gays and lesbians, right? Because what about if you're bisexual, right? And so when you have men, women, if I'm neither of those, where do I go? And so you have to do that math, you know, that Debbie did, like, well, how are they going to read me? Which one's going to be less threatening to other people, right? So, but if you get into the bathroom and you find out it's a single stall bathroom, well, why are those bathrooms gendered? How many of y'all have gendered bathrooms in your homes? What is the gender of a toilet, right? And so that's literally a thing you can do today. Look at your physical space. If you have a single stall bathroom, if it does not just say all gender bathroom, take down that sign, print out or handwrite, whatever you got to do, tape it over that. You don't have to do extensive renovation of your bathrooms or whatever else, right? And then be very clear about that. So like those are ways that you communicate welcome without communicating welcome, right? Because it's like more than your words. I've heard a lot of churches say, yeah, you're welcome. Then you show up and then you're actually not. You're like, oh, right? Y'all ain't even buy the food yet. Y'all didn't cook. I'm not actually welcome here. Or you cooked food that I don't eat, right? So it's like not just what you say or convincing someone, it's how are you shifting culture? Because the bigger thing with that is, right, is not only have you shown this person, maybe it's my time in Missouri, it's the show me state, you've shown this person, no, we really do. We are committed to welcome. So we're going to not just have white men on our walls. We're going to not just have boys and girls in our book or men, women in our liturgy. And we're going to say specifically cisgender, trans, LGBTQ, anti-racism, you know, from the pulpit. Our leadership is not going to be just cis het white, right? show me your budget. You know, you say you care about these things. How does your budget look around youth stuff, around whatever else, right? So show me that you really mean you're being welcoming, you know, so that when I do show up, you know, it doesn't feel like I have to teach you, right?
Thank you. And that was, I don't know if you, I'm the one from St. Louis. So.
Oh,
yeah.
awesome. Dope. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Someone earlier too had asked a question, you know, like if you don't know the person's gender, how do you approach that? My question would be, why do you need to know their gender, right? And again, not at the person who asked that, but I hear this often. I have found, you know, someone who, you know, was like kind of read as a woman for the bulk of my life, and more recently as a man, it is alarming the ways in which my respect levels have increased, the ways in which people don't second guess stuff that comes out of my mouth that before, even though I'm an expert, they question everything like, yeah, but I can literally have the exact same script. If they read me as a man, it's not even a thing, right? And so I would make the assertion that we don't actually need to know someone's gender as much as we think we do. And because of the way we've structured society, everything hinges on gender and it has to be binary, because to queer that up means all these things that we've built upon it will crumble. Our pulpits are going to not be as masculine across the way, even though maybe your denomination isn't that way, but across the board, particularly in Christianity, is still very masculine space, right? Whether or not women can have a say about what happens to their bodies, never mind that men can, you know, and like what our youth are seeing and learning from us along the way, right? So if it's not necessary for you to know their gender, maybe the question is, why do you need to know it? And if it's a matter of you're not sure what their pronouns are, well, you don't know their name is until you ask, right? It's like, hey, you know, what's your name? Or my name is blah, 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 and here are the pronouns that I use. And if they, you know, what that does, and someone else asked a similar question. So if someone is like, oh, you gave me your pronouns, I might feel comfortable giving you mine, right? Or maybe someone who's like, pronouns, why are you doing that? Now you have a willing participant to hear about the importance of why it matters to not assume someone's gender or why you're offering pronouns, right? So now you have this opportunity to tell someone this, but had you not offer your pronouns, that person would go about their day doing, you know, unintentional violences at the people they meet, you know, making assumptions. I'll tell you what not to do is, are you a boy or a girl? Which is what I've gotten often from people of every age, or many ages, I should say, not every. But again, if you approach it from the level of like respecting someone first, you know, again, minding the things that you have normalized about who you are, start queering up all of that, right? If being a cis woman is your norm, think about what it means to be a cis woman, right? Because I know you do when you're walking at home at night in a way that cis men don't have to think about walking at home at night, right? So your identities and how people perceive them matter deeply. And so as someone who has the privileges of being in like more normalized identities, you know, societally normalized identities, you know, share the work of educating. And if that means starting with yourself, please do. And then as you learn more, speak to the people in your spheres of influence so that by the time, you know, you've kind of having these difficult, awkward conversations, you know, and I usually start of my speaking with awkwardness is welcome in the room, but since we're in different rooms, I didn't go there today, but be awkward. Okay, cool, you're awkward. What happened? Did anybody die from awkwardness? Not that I'm aware of, right? Be awkward. And then name it. Like, hey, look, this is probably a little bit awkward, but you know, I'm trying to make sure that this is da 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 da, or like I want to be respectful of who you are. Can you please? My name is not one that you typically see, right? So I prefer people like, hey, look, you know what? I haven't seen your name before. How do you pronounce it? Not Phiwa. Oh, do you have a short name? Okay, first of all, my name is Phiwa. That is the short name, but also, you know what I'm saying? Like, these are sounds that your mouth makes. It may not be syllables that go together usually in English, but it's not like I have clicks in my name, you know, because I would understand that maybe a little bit, right? You know, but like just the audacity to utter me in such a manner, right? That, oh, well, make it easy for me. Pardon me? I gave you my name. I can say it slower. I can spell it, you know what I'm saying? Whatever you need to do, but respect me enough, right? To call me by the names and the language that I use. And again, like I said, it takes a lot of practice. It's awkward. It's shifting culture, beginning with yourself. It's not like kind of like this kind of white saviorism kind of coming in and like, I'm going to save all the LGBTQ folk, but start with your cis hetero self. Like, what am I doing? What am I ignoring that allows me to move with privilege that I can start naming to disrupt these practices that are making it hard for LGBTQ folk or youth, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Did I get everyone's pressing questions? I feel like hopefully I covered everything.
Does anyone have a final question? Yeah, I see Denise's hand.
Oh, yeah.
I just wanted to say, I've never felt so awkward as in that scenario. And I was saying to myself, didn't he ask what I was? And I, and I know who you were, and I didn't want to say anything that would offend you, but I didn't want to offend whoever my actual character. I mean, it's very confusing, but it was very enlightening as well, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, let me quickly come. We didn't go to the scenarios, but I want to come back to that one in particular. That is such a dangerous thing, and like I said, these are things that have actually happened in real life. Where I'll be in an organization, I'm like starting a relationship with someone new, and then here comes someone who's known me since forever, and they start calling me she, and I don't. You are presenting. I'm saying, like, you are presenting as a woman. You said you're a woman. But when we got started, right? And so now, Allison is probably like, wait, I was reading Denise as a woman. What, like, maybe we can ask her too, like, how that went for her. But it becomes danger because now I've just outed you as transgender potentially, and now you're stuck with a situation of, you ended up coming out, right? In our scenario, you're like, oh, but maybe you didn't want to come out to that person, right? And now this organization, I've jeopardized your relationship with that potentially because, like, you were just going about your life, like you can live your own life, and now I've just introduced something that you were not ready to disclose. Maybe never. That's up to you. It was not mine to disclose, right? And so by my not respecting your pronouns and even like digging in my heels when you told me, I'm like, yeah, but we're friends. You're fine. No, I'm not fine, right? Because now, like, you're saying that internal thing that you talked about, this is what a lot of us as trans folk are dealing with constantly is it safe for me to be here? How do they read me? Someone has just said she. Do I correct them? Because it's correct them means I'm coming out. But to not say anything, now I've just established, it's, so like just so many layers, this innocent conversation, right, has just changed how you now need to move about in the world, right? And so if I were to mind my own privileges, I'd be like, hey, Denise, great to see you. I'm like, and maybe not mention all of that right away. And then like, hey, can I talk to you for a second? And I can ask you, look, how would you like me to address you? How ought we do this and whatever else, right? Or even if you're at an event with name tags, encouraging people to write pronouns if they would like to, right? That could be an easy way to kind of help minimize, even on our Zoom chats, I had to switch computers at the last minute, so I didn't get a chance to rename myself. But, if you see some of the people on this here, they have like their pronouns next to their names. That kind of helps us, right? If we're not sure, well, now I know Jill O says she. I'm going to talk about Jill using the word she. That's what she's told me, right? Where I don't have to be awkward about it. So offering that up in advance is helpful. And again, like, not all trans people have the same stuff. I'm only talking about my own experiences. Some people want you to like, actually, no, that's not what their thing. Others are like, please just do it in private, So ask the person that you want to respect and care about, pull them aside if you need to.
We have at our church, our name tags have the pronouns.
Nice.
And I think that, initially people were asking, well, why? And we just recently had a person who, we're doing everything by Zoom, and this person, I actually was leading a book club, and a person who had a different name, which was a man's name, on the name tag in the Zoom, the name was female name. And I didn't know what to do. And, when I to address this person, and the person has decided to just didn't want an announcement, but just present themselves with the new name. And it's gone pretty smoothly. I think I probably was, because it was the first time, was a little awkward, but
sure. Embrace the awkwardness. Awkwardness will be your
Yeah.
friend if you're really truly committed to being an activist and an ally and an advocate. Embrace the awkwardness. Even in
I
this
like that.
situation, a quick little direct message. Hey, I noticed your name tag and your Zoom name don't match. How might I address you? Again, like just check in with a person, ask what they would like, in a way that you would like to be respected. You're not going to broadcast it to everyone, and then don't do that for them either. So I know we're at our time, and Jill and I are going to be setting up a follow-up conversation for y'all to hopefully engage. I will send the PowerPoint with the rest of the presentation. I think this ended up being a little bit more richer to really engage with y'all where you are.
Yeah, thank you all very much. And Reverend Langeni, thank you so much for your time. I just put my email in the chat. Folks, if you have more questions that you would like me to ask Phiwa, please feel free to email them to me in the next few days, and I will make sure that happens. But thank you so much for joining us. And please bear in mind our offerings for next month, the first Wednesdays of the month, noon to 1:30. We look forward to seeing you then. Thank you, everyone.